Hey everyone, welcome to another YouTube video with exercises for injuries.com. My name is Kaya. Today we're going to be talking about anterior pelvic tilt and the back, hip, knee pain that is associated with it. So, anterior pelvic tilt, that's a tilt forward of the pelvis. Obviously that's not our proper alignment, proper posture. So I've got a bit of an anterior pelvic tilt, so I'm a good example. So in terms of like tilting our pelvis, an anterior tilt is tilting it forward. So as if we had like a bucket of water on top of our pelvis, we'd be dumping it forward. So posterior tilt is tipping it backwards. So really common for people is to have a natural anterior pelvic tilt. So if you can see, when I'm standing naturally, I've got a bit of an over curvature in my low back. My butt kind of sticks out a bit too much. And the front of my body, my torso is coming forward. So ideally, our posture is more in line. So I have to tilt my pelvis back in order to stack my shoulders over hips, over ankles. So what the 5 things that we're going to go through do, they're going to stretch out those overworked tight muscles that are working too much, that are contributing to that tilt. And then we're going to strengthen the muscles that need to work hard in order to maintain proper posture. So if you have tight hips or tight quads, if you notice that you've kind of got unexplained back, knee, hip pain, then it could be a postural thing. It could be that the way you do all your movements is coming from improper alignment. So we're going to stretch out our hip flexors first. So we're going to do this in a lunge. Now you could do this from standing. So if you were standing, you could come into a bit of a lunge here. That back knee can be bent. We're going to tuck the pelvis backwards. So we're doing that posterior tilt, trying to tip the water back behind us. And you should feel a stretch in this front of the hip flexor here. So we'll stay here 30 seconds to a minute. If standing's not possible, you can always do this lunge from the knees. So I'll come to the other side. Tilting that pelvis back should stretch the front of that hip flexor here. You can always push into those back toes if you need to deepen the stretch. Good. So if again that's not possible, you can always use something like a foam roller, where you get the roller underneath that hip flexor and you roll it out. Or a ball, like a lacrosse ball, or a ball specifically for rolling. Any way that it works for you to release the hip flexor. So holding that stretch 30 seconds to 60 seconds, and if you can, stretch it again a couple times. So it's always good, you can go through this like 2 to 3 times. Next thing we're going to do is stretch the quads. So in terms of an anterior pelvic tilt, the quads tend to be overworked, the hamstrings underworked. So we want to release the quads, relax the quads. So I'm going to do a lying down quad stretch, a little bit nicer than standing. So coming onto one side, grabbing my foot. You can always place something around the ankle like a strap to pull that ankle in. And then I'm finding that stretch through the front of the leg. We don't want any pain in the knee joint here. If it's hurting the knee joint, you need to come out a little bit. And again, 30 to 60 seconds here. And then I would switch sides. All right, so once we've released those overworked tight muscles, we're gonna get into some strengthening stuff. So the first thing that we're gonna do is a leg extension. Now, again, going through that pelvic tilt idea, the posterior pelvic tilt means we're bringing the hips back, anterior coming forward. So I'm gonna lie down for this one. Now, when I lie down, if you have a bit of an anterior pelvic tilt like me, you'll probably be able to put your hand or your arm underneath your low back. What we're gonna do is we're gonna pull the belly button down towards the floor and tilt our hips the opposite way to flatten down the back. Now obviously natural curvature in the spine is best, but we're trying to kind of reverse the over curvature in the opposite way. So hopefully you can see that I'm pulling down towards the floor to flatten out the back, and I'm going to extend one leg, but I'm not letting my low back come up off the floor, and then I'll come back, switch legs, So depending on how much your pelvis is tilted, you'll probably have to work pretty hard to keep that low back down towards the floor. My core is engaged continuously through this. Good, and I'm gonna go for at least 10 reps, 5 on each side, but working up to more if you can, and holding it for a second as you extend the leg. All right, so like I said before, you can go through all of these 2 to 3 times if you're up for it. Okay, next thing we're doing, glute bridges. So again, with that pelvic tilt, I'm gonna try to posteriorly rotate my pelvis before I go up into the bridge. So normally if I were to do a bridge, I would just come straight up into it and come down. This time, I'm gonna do that same thing, tilt my pelvis down. Your tailbone will lift up off the floor, and then I'm coming up, squeezing my glutes, keeping that pelvis tilted up, and then lower back down, then you can release. So you can see in my pelvis, I'm lifting it up, my tailbone lifts. Use the glutes, come up, hold, 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 then you can let it go. So we're gonna go for 10 of these. Hold, it's gonna be core strength and glutes, because our abdominals and our glutes are probably weaker than our other muscles if we have an anterior pelvic tilt. So that's why we stretched out our hip flexors and our quads. And now in this exercise, we're using our abdominals, our glutes, and our hamstrings. So we're strengthening the muscles that are too weak, and we've stretched out the overworked ones. Good, so once you've done your 10, you can stop. And the very last thing that we're gonna do is a plank, but we're gonna think about that same tilt of the pelvis. So you can always come onto the knees in a plank or up onto the toes. Now, if you've got an anterior tilt, the tendency is probably to do this. I'm gonna tuck my pelvis under. So instead of this, I'm doing this. So my core is really, really engaged here. I'm pulling my tailbone down towards the floor, and then I'm coming up. So I'm trying to straighten out my whole body. And we're gonna hold, if you can, for 30 to 60 seconds. But start, if you need to, with 10 seconds, make your way up to 15. And only as long as you're keeping your form good. If you start to collapse, then you need to stop and reset. Find that engagement in the core and then come back up. Deep breaths. Good, and then you'd release. So as you work up towards those, you can repeat the cycle 2 to 3 times. And then over time, hopefully, your posture starts to correct itself, and then all of your movement patterns will be less injury prone and hopefully more comfortable and no pain in everyday movements. So I hope that was helpful. Check out exercisesforinjuries.com with any other questions or interests that you may have. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye.